I'm going to begin with a verse from the Dhammapada. These are some of the earliest teaching verses attributed to the Buddha. All experience is preceded by mind, led by mind, made by mind. Speak or act with a corrupted mind, and suffering follows as the wagon wheel follows the hoof of the ox. All experience is preceded by mind, led by mind, made by mind. Speak or act with a peaceful mind, and happiness follows like a never departing shadow. So the mind, oftentimes when I lead meditation, and we'll talk about, how did it go? And the thing you hear most often is that people are really frustrated because their mind was so busy and they couldn't concentrate, and they're sure that they're a terrible meditator. And I think that's, those are some of the biggest myths about meditating, is that your job is to get rid of all of your thoughts, and that only beginners experience this. Not the case at all. The mind's doing what the mind is intended to do. It's thinking. And it's normal. But when distracting thoughts can keep us from ever settling and focusing our attention, instead of fighting them, it can be helpful to draw on some skillful methods for dealing with them. And I want to make a little caveat here, because anybody who's ever heard me talk before knows that I am a big proponent of listening to our thoughts, digging into thoughts, listening to our feelings, understanding them, knowing where they come from. That sense of, if you don't know you're suffering, you can't let it go. Sometimes we need to do that for self-knowledge and for healing. And then sometimes we have these thoughts that are just not helpful and not fruitful. And they might send us off into delusion and confusion. And these repetitive thoughts that just go in circles, we often call them proliferation. That's what we're going to talk about tonight. So recently, the reason we're here talking about this is I've had a really hard time with distraction when I'm sitting. A lot going on in the family, a lot going on in the world. And it might wake me up in the morning, or I might try and have my meditation and find myself really frustrated at how difficult it's become. So I decided it was time for a change. I was going to take a step back and do something different in my meditation. And so I started a course with Bhikkhu Analayo. He's a Buddhist scholar and monk who teaches at the Barry Center for Buddhist Studies. And he's doing a course on the 16 steps of mindful breathing. And you'll find these courses and talks in many, many places. You can find free ones on Dharma Seed and courses everywhere. So it's, but he does a wonderful job of teaching this, and I felt the need to bring this into my meditation practice. And the first 4 steps of those 16 steps are the steps that we used in our meditation tonight. We focused on the long breath and then the short breath. We focused on mindfulness of the body and calming the body. An intentional focus on helping to settle our mind so that we can be mindful. And I've really been struck by how helpful it's been to return to these basic instructions of the Buddha. It's the first foundation of mindfulness of the body. The body is the one place that brings us back to the present moment when we like to be elsewhere. But we don't tend to stay in that body very long. It's said that if attention were a flashlight, it's usually shining on our thoughts. But the more that we can draw that attention back into the body, the more likely that we'll be present, rather than trying to be rehashing the past or thinking about the future. We'll also see things a little more clearly instead of through this long, involved stories that we tell ourselves about the stories of our lives over and over. So how do we know when we're caught in stories and clinging to our version of the story of me? And how do we stop it? Well, let's take a step back and observe how we create these movies in our minds. Now, you may recall this story. I've told it once before, but I thought it bears repeating, but this time to illustrate a different point. It's called Little Movies, and it's a poem by David Kirby. A man had a peacock. A man had a peacock, says playwright Tom Stoppard. And the man was shaving one morning. And in the mirror, he sees the peacock atop the garden wall and about to jump to the other side. So the man drops his razor and races out just as the bird reaches the motorway and starts to leg it to God knows where. And he catches it after 100 yards or so and puts the peacock under his arms and starts home. So the story ends happily. But in the meantime, a good half dozen cars have sped by, and their occupants have seen a man clad only in pajama pants, his face covered by shaving foam, carrying a peacock. What did they think? That the man lost a bet on a rugby match, perhaps, and now has to walk from Whitby to Berwick upon Tweed with the foam on his face and the bird under his arms? Or that he belongs to a cult religion that worships shaving, partial nudity, and peacocks, and he's on his annual pilgrimage? Or that he has been slipped a powerful drug by his wife's lover, who is sending the man out in the world this way, so he'll appear deranged and spend the rest of his days in a care home while the two lovers squander the man's considerable fortune. All lives end the same way. And between the start and the finish, it's the stories that count. So the stories can become so fanciful and delicious that it can become hard to remember what was actually true when the story started. I mean, can you rewind this one and go back and remember what actually happened? Can you think back to an image in this story that people actually saw when they were driving down the street? What did he actually do? Go ahead and throw it out and I'll just repeat it for the mic. He had shaving cream, okay. Pajama pants. He ran. And there was a peacock. Don't want to forget the peacock. And so there it is. There was a man, pajamas, no shirt, shaving cream, and a peacock. And all the rest was story. This Dr. Charan Rangarath, a neuroscientist at UC Davis, says that we think that memory is supposed to be an archive of the past, that we should be able to play the past like a movie in our heads. But we don't replay the past as it happened. We do it through a lens of interpretation and imagination. Our identities are built on shifting sand. So this tendency that we have, the way that our mind works, is described in Buddhist psychology as the 5 aggregates of clinging, or the 5 khandhas. It's like our operating system of how we process information and see the world. And it's filled with this clinging that we have to an image of ourself and our tendency to experience every sensation and thought from the lens of our world, to build stories about our experience that often feature us as the star of the show. To me, Gil Fronsdal has this wheel of awareness that I find super helpful. And I find it the most accessible way to understand this process of creating meaning in thought. And Brianna, can you put that up on the screen for us? Okay. Got it? Okay. So this is the wheel that Gil Fronsdal uses to describe the way we think. And in the center is the hub, is the body. And the hub of the wheel, it's grounded. It's where things move a little more slowly. They don't have to go around in such a big wheel. And the next ring is the physical sensations, the contact that we have, the things we touch, see, hear, physical body, the form. The next round is the feeling tones, or what's known as Vedana, seeing things as pleasant or unpleasant or neutral. And then in the next circle, we have mental activity, the concepts, the perceptions that we have, the ways that we name things that usually include something about how we feel about them. And then there's formations, sort of the chief of staff of how we run our mind, the way we organize things, gather things, direct things to get things done. These include our mental states and our emotions. And then there's our consciousness, the story of how we see the world and ourselves in it. And it's on these outer edges of the wheel, our consciousness, where we can get to proliferation, where we're just sort of spinning out and becoming totally lost in these stories. So to become more mindful, if we can return to the hub of the wheel, where we're more centered, seeing things as they actually are, back in the body in the here and now. Because when there's no mindfulness, there's just looping and suffering. Thanks, Brianna. The Thai forest monk Ajahn Chah has a metaphor for the proliferating mind. He said it's like a mechanical doll on a racetrack. And she's out on that outer rim of the wheel, just going round and round and round and round. And instead of chasing that mechanical doll around the racetrack, if we could return to the hub of the wheel, calm the mind, calm the body, we might see things more clearly. And when we're mindful of our thought patterns, when we're aware of them, sometimes we can catch those thoughts when they first emerge, in those early steps of the first contact, deciding whether it's pleasant or unpleasant or neutral, and not let it fly out and spiral. They say mindfulness can be compared to a cat watching mice come out of a mouse hole, always alert to watching that mice come out. And can we catch it when the nose or the whisker first emerges? That first contact. Because if we wait until the mouse comes out fully, we start to name it a mouse. And then we react with unpleasant, our feeling of dislike for mice. And then we have our perception that mice are a filthy problem and they must be stopped. And our thought that we have to take action, we have to set some traps or get an exterminator. And then we spill out until we're imagining procreating mice running all over the kitchen and taking over the house. In a minute, it can happen like that, and we're catastrophizing. So is it possible to rewind that image and get back to when that first contact, seeing the nose, seeing the whisker, and then instead of spiraling out, what helps us return to that hub, to that present moment, to embodied presence? So this happens in theory, and it also happens for each of us when we sit down. So I want to ask us to take a pause now to try this on. And I'm going to ask you to go ahead and I'm going to ask you a few questions and we can just drop in and think about this. Eyes closed or open, it's up to you. And then in a bit, if you're willing, nobody has to, but if you're willing, we're going to share this with a couple of folks, because very often we learn from how others are also experiencing this meditation practice. So we'll do a little sharing. But first, let's think it through for ourselves. So just dropping in and considering, when you meditate, where do you get lost in thought? Are there habitual tapes that play in your head? Like, what's the nature of your habitual thoughts? It can be general, is it daydreaming or worrying about a person or thinking about money or wanting something, wanting a relationship to be different? Where does your mind tend to go? And then, like a cat watching the mouse hole, can we catch it early and rewind the movie? When does this thought emerge? Is it an old story that we keep bringing up again and again? What's the proximate cause? What happens before this comes up? Am I stressed or bored or avoiding something? Now, how does it feel to think these thoughts? Is there a felt sense of this in the body? And when, if you get caught in these proliferating thoughts, what helps to return to being mindful? What helps? All right, and taking a deep breath in. I'm going to ask those of you who are willing, if you might, we're going to go into groups of 3, both here in the room and on Zoom. Groups of 3, can be 4 for an odd group, and I'll just have to talk faster. And we're just going to spend a few minutes each. If everybody could sort of watch your groups, everybody has a chance to talk, say 3 minutes each. I'm going to simplify it a bit. And Brianna's going to put the questions up on the chat as well. But just 3 things. What's the general nature of your habitual thoughts? Whatever you feel like sharing or not. How do you respond to these thoughts? Is there a physical sense of how it feels? And if it happens, what's helpful? So what's the nature of the thoughts? How does it feel? What's helpful? So about 3 minutes each, and then you might have a minute or 2 to talk back and forth about what you're learning. And then if there are any volunteers, we'll ask if anybody wants to share when we return. No need to report back everything. So if those in the room would just find a group of 3, and you can make it a 4 if we need to make things even. And Brianna, if we can launch the groups online. So I'm just going to ask if anybody is willing to share any insights or thoughts that came up as you spoke with others. Perhaps anybody on Zoom would like to share, I think if you hit the reaction button, you can hit raise hands, and that way your face will pop up at the top and we'll know you want to talk. So anybody on Zoom want to share anything that came up in your group?
I'd like for Susan to share what she spoke of.
Susan, you want to unmute?
Yes.
Hi.
Well, all right. What I did speak of is that even if when we go back to the body, there's something deeper that is the source, that's home. And that time and again, this is ultimately, if going back to the body is helpful, we do it. And then realize that's not the final. There's something else, because if it is the body, and their minds will go off in the body, stories about the body, or if it's our thoughts, our stories are getting all involved in thoughts, time and again, recognize what underlies the thoughts and rest in that. And of course, we don't stay there. The mind skitters off in a thought or a pain or a whatever else is happening, and we keep going back and back. And it's just simple, using the body, if that's our part of our usual path, that helps us, but it's not the final thing.
Thank you. And this is Susan Stone, IMCC, one of the founding IMCC teachers. Thank you, Susan. How about anybody in the room? Anything you learned from one of your buddies?
A couple of us said planning is what we notice we're doing. And then someone else said judging. And I thought, oh yeah, that's there a lot too. So very, not necessarily comforting, but just, I'm not the only one that goes to those two things. And then for coming back, well, that's the harder part. We talked about when someone's leading and they, in the middle of the quiet meditation, well, if you happen to be thinking, you can come back, and as she said, and that Pat Coffey used to say, and Fred says, come back kindly, and that's again just great to practice, because several of us go to judging ourselves and doing things wrong, and coming back kindly. Oh, you're judging again. Well, it's okay. You're judging. Come back to your breath. I'm not so good with the body stuff, because I get happy, and when I'm planning, I get kind of excited, and then, oh, and wait, I'm not supposed to be doing this, or I want to relax. It's not so relaxing. I want to just be and relax and be in the present.
Thank you. So a lot of planning and judging going on, and that being able to come back can sometimes be a little difficult. Yeah. And recognizing the self-judgment that goes on is really important. Thank you for bringing that up. Anybody else on Zoom have anything you'd like to share? Anybody?
Well, we had
Hey, Barbara.
Hi. We had movies, and like not real movies, but just like fantasy movies and songs that kind of came in, and I thought that was interesting.
When we talk about movies, we have entertainment happening when we're meditating. Songs, yes. Anybody else?
I think what was so important to me about what Susan was emphasizing is it's not trying to get rid of the thoughts. It's always trying to get to the awareness of what's happening.
Yeah.
I know that the resistance just always makes it worse for me. But awareness feels like the key.
Yeah, thank you, Eliza.
Yeah, I was gonna say something about Gil's model, which I found to be quite interesting. I sort of feel like he had consciousness all the way outside, and I would probably, was my understanding that it should be actually in the center, and that a lot of these things where we have proliferation, that's all like mind, and also, I don't know about others, but a lot of the thought proliferation also, especially as you get older, relates to things that are happening in your body that, like your thoughts, you also can't really control. So you realize maybe that's not really sort of what you are. And then what do you come back to? And so that's where I would have put consciousness in the center. But just my understanding, one person's, stuff. I don't know.
And I'm still trying to grapple with those aggregates. So I love hearing that perspective. I also love the way you talked about as you're getting older, that coming back to the body may not be the place. They may not feel like home in this moment. So, well, thank you for sharing all of that. Couple of thoughts on all of this. One, that it's hard to recognize how fast our mind is moving until we're still. And then we get still. I like to think of it as sitting on the bank of a river and watching a really fast river flowing, all this churning's going on. And then imagine you could place a big stick in the middle of that river. And suddenly you can notice how quickly the water's going around the stick in the current because you have some perspective. And now imagine that you are that stick. So you're actually feeling that water flowing through you. And it might be cold or it might be warm, fast or slow. But you're having that actual immediate contact with the water. So we've gone from being an observer to a more mindful observer to having the direct experience of the water flowing through us. And I think whenever we can take ourselves back to that more direct experience of the present moment, right now, just as it is, we're seeing more clearly what's happening without these layers that we put on of our feelings and our bias and our self-referential thinking. The Buddha's profound instruction to his son Rahula was about non-clinging. He said, see everything with perfect wisdom. This is not mine, not I, not myself. And the Buddha taught that a place of practice lies within the body, that this works for us. Saying, the ancients tell us that he said, there's one thing that when cultivated and regularly practiced leads to deep spiritual intention, to peace, to mindfulness and clear comprehension, to vision and knowledge, to a happy life here and now, and to the culmination of wisdom and awakening. And what is that one thing? Mindfulness centered on the body. So when our thoughts are spinning out and we struggle to stay in the present moment and keep our mind from wandering past or future, it may be helpful. Come home to that hub of the wheel and start again. And I'd say call on all the skillful methods that help you return to center. We've said, and Susan mentioned, the body may not be right for you. Investigating the thoughts. There are lots of skillful methods. It's returning to any of the anchors, whether that's the breath or the sensations or sound. Sometimes coming back to those anchors helps. We can exercise our mind muscle and begin with a narrow aperture of focused attention. and then move to a broader, letting in the body and more spacious awareness, maybe investigating those thoughts and feelings. But for some of us, we might need to begin with time of focus so that we can reduce those distractions of the mind and spend the first 5 or 10 minutes of our meditation settling. There are lots of skillful means. Does it help you to do a body scan and begin your meditation and settle into that? Does it help you to give your mind something to do, like a mantra or loving kindness phrase, counting breaths? If our attention is a flashlight normally shining on our thoughts, try moving that attention and bringing it into the body, breath in the body walking, feeling the energy body as we go about our day. And I'll grant you, for some of us, keeping the attention on the body, feeling feelings in the body can be really difficult. And I can still remember the first time I was asked to say how I felt something in my body. And I looked down and thought, what, this brick with no nerve endings? I had no idea what they were about. And I think that having curiosity and coming back to that curiosity about this energy body can make us more sensitive, make us more aware of that experience. And if we can tap into that experience, it can really give us new channels of information and body wisdom about how we're feeling in this moment. So be open to expanding your body literacy, descriptions of how it feels in the body. You know, that stress might feel like constriction, gripping, or tightness in the chest. You might feel warmth or coolness. You might feel itchy or achy or painful. With tingling, vibration, low, pulsing. Or we just might feel calm, peaceful, and relaxed. So just bringing that kind curiosity to the breath, the body, to the sensations and the senses, and know that that can strengthen your mindfulness. And if I had my druthers, we'd do a short practice and get back and do those 4 steps. So we've come to the end of our night, and I hope that thank you for letting me walk down the lane I needed to walk down with looking at distraction, the things that were helpful, and bringing me back to center. And I hope that something that we heard here tonight is helpful to you as well. Thank you for being here. Good night.